Once again, Egyptians are defying the country's ban on political protests. Demonstrators have been heeding the call of a former Egyptian army contractor called Mohammed Ali, who's hoping to deal a blow to Sisi's presidency. Peaceful protesters who have come out to demand Sisi's resignation have been met with brutality. These are the first protests against Sisi's rule, but this time it's not just one mass demonstration in Cairo, but rather small scattered protests throughout the country. But will these protests have any impact? Joining us to discuss that, we have Mostafa Ragab in London. He's the founder of the UK Egyptian Association. And in Tunis, we have Hussein Baoumi. He's Amnesty International's Egypt researcher. Welcome, gentlemen, to the show. Mostafa, these protests that journalists are reporting on, what are they on? What's the reason behind those?
Well, let me tell you first, it's all fabricated news. I have been in Egypt for the last 3 weeks, and I just got back yesterday. I've been traveling up and down the country for visits and interviews. I have seen nothing whatsoever in the major towns in Egypt. Egypt is peaceful. The majority of the Egyptian people supporting the president for all the work he's doing. I'm not just talking about this is actually true on the ground. You see the work that's been done. The majority of the Egyptian people are in support. Obviously, anywhere in the world, you can never satisfy 100% of the people. That is happening in America, in the UK, everywhere. There will be some people upset or disappointed about things, but what I heard, not what I've seen, that there were 3 very little incidents in rural area and villages that the Brotherhood using children to go out and try to say this is a demonstration. I'd like to see any evidence for this allegation that there is demonstration whatsoever. People will say we spoke to so-and-so, we heard from so-and-so. There is no evidence whatsoever. Even the pictures you have in the background there in the studio, they are all pictures, and this is all what the media against Egypt are doing, whether it is in England or in Turkey, the Kremlin and other stations.
All right,
they're just using old videos to pretend that there is demonstrations in Egypt.
Right, Hussein, let's give Hussein a chance to respond. Mostafa Ragab says this is much ado about nothing. Actually, he goes a step further. He says this is all fabricated by the media. What do you know about these protests?
So what we know so far is that there has been a number of protests scattered and small protests in a number of rural communities in Egypt. There have also been some protests in poorer urban neighborhoods in Egypt as well. We know that because we spoke to some of the protesters, but also we know that because there has been, hundreds have been arrested so far. And we know that because the public prosecutor have issued a statement saying that they have released around 60 children in the last few days over what they refer to as riots. We also know that because there was a source from the Ministry of Interior that said that they have not used weapons, or that they have not used bird shots against the protesters, but that they have only used tear gas to disperse protesters. And we also know that because the spokesperson for the cabinet himself, he himself actually issued a statement saying that, referring to one of the protests as having a legitimate call, but he denied other protests. So we know for sure that there have been several protests around Egypt. But also it's important to note that some of the videos circulating, some of them are indeed fabricated, or some people have been sharing videos that are quite old, but we have been able to verify some of the videos where there have been incidents of use of force by security forces through our tech lab, which also verifies videos when we publish about other countries.
Right, Hussein, let me just follow up, Hussein, because you are saying there are scattered and protests in mostly poor and rural provinces scattered across Egypt. What are these protests about? Who's behind them?
No. Can he tell us how many of them and where are they? Because I don't approve of anybody who say I heard. I'd like to have seen.
Right, Mostafa. If you give me a chance to do my job, I'll give you a chance to do yours. So I just ask a question to Hussein. I'll come back to you in just a moment.
So yeah, so there are a number of towns in Giza, for example, at Fih, there is in Luxor. We have seen protests recently in Luxor. We have seen in Ena. We have seen in Minya. And I mean, I'm not just saying that this is the people that we spoke to. I'm saying that there are videos verified by the same team that verifies videos of protests in Turkey and
Right,
in the
right. But
US.
what is behind these protests? What has triggered these protests?
So from what we have collected so far, it seems that a lot of people that are protesting in relation to the houses demolitions. It seems that in many cases people were protesting against the recent decision by the government to demolish houses and against the reconciliation law. And we also know that because during the investigations, the questioning by the Supreme State Security Prosecution, when they asked the protesters or people why they were protesting, these are the reasons that they have brought forward. One protest in Luxor seems to be primarily because of the death of one man, Rawi. But in general, it seems that the protests are connected to socioeconomic demands
Right.
rather than fully political ones.
So Mustafa, Hussein is saying the people are protesting against the government campaign to stop illegal construction, which then in return requires people to pay fines to legalize home ownership. Is it so inconceivable that people would go out on the street for this?
I don't think so. People who build illegal buildings, they have gone to the town hall and they have started to correct the work. Of course, they took advantage of the time of the revolution, and so many tower blocks have came up illegally and have made a big mess in the country. So this is illegal work, and they have to be punished. But now the government came to a solution to pay the fine and legalize the work. There is no reason for them to come out to the street. The things is, I ask a question, how many of them and where? And the places he mentioned, there were nothing whatsoever. There were an incident in Luxor, got nothing to do with demonstration. It was a conflict between a police officer and a father and his son. That would no demonstration there. So that's why I'm saying to my friend Hussein, if you pays your work, and I heard and I spoke to, I don't approve of your work. You are a man who working for human rights organization who funded by some countries who they will never be funded unless they do the work they ask them to do. That's your job. I'm not doing a job. I'm an Egyptian who visit Egypt regularly, who see the country, who see what's happening in the country, the improvement that is being done. Oh, Egypt is facing a hell of a situation. You have the Libya border, and you say you are specialized in research about Libya, and you know the danger that is coming to Egypt from Libya. Egypt have got the dam in Ethiopia to deal with. Egypt have got the terrorist organization in Sana
what
to deal with.
reason, Mustafa, before I give Hussein a chance to respond, what reason would Hussein have to lie here on the show?
It's a job. He's getting paid for it.
He's
a man who worked for
He's
human
getting paid
rights.
to lie?
Yeah. All human rights people are liars. I can tell you that on the air. They all fabricate news because to get a job. That's what they do.
Hussein, I want to give you a chance. There's quite an allegation. There's quite an allegation and an accusation that you are directing towards Hussein there. Please, please, I want to give you a chance to respond to Mustafa.
That's true. It's not an allegation.
That's the easiest thing to say, of course. I mean, we hear that from people who defend the governments everywhere. We hear the exact same from people who defend the Turkish government when we talk about the violations that the Turkish government do against people. We hear that from people when we criticize the use of force by French or by American police force. We hear that. So everywhere, it's really the same everywhere. But I mean, you would not really see people engaging with what's as the violations that people are being subjected to. I mean, when saying that, for example, are you saying that the public prosecutor is lying when he said that he ordered the release of children that were arrested in the recent riots? I mean, are you saying are you saying that the spokesperson for the cabinet is lying when he said that there were protests in Egypt? So, I mean, there are protests in Egypt. You cannot deny that. What we are talking about is how was the security forces' response to this, and from what we have verified through interviews, through verification of videos, through a very rigorous methodology that we use everywhere. Without discrimination against countries, we have found that the Egyptian security forces, they have used excessive force in some incidents, and that they have arrested hundreds of people whom we have information about where they were arrested, data about their names, what they were questioned about in front of the Supreme State Security Prosecution. So, I mean, it's very easy to say that that doesn't happen and bury your head in the sand, but I mean, that doesn't make...
Hussein, let me jump in here just and ask Mostafa, why are you categorically denying even the possibility of protests? Protests are taking place everywhere in democratically elected countries, in Germany, in France, in the US, in the UK. They are byproduct of a political discourse.
Agree, but I'll take his words. I will use his own words. I take the words out of his mouth. He said children were arrested. This is what I said. The Brotherhood are using children to go out in the street. And it was so kind of the government to release those children. So that was a human right job. They released the children, that the Brotherhood using them to go out in the street. How can you use children to go out and demonstrate? Why the older people or the leaders? This is what is happening all the time. They use people to go out, and those people are arrested for doing some work they're not authorized to do. You have to take a permission to do a demonstration, and you have to go to the police station and be allowed to. All the pictures that you show there, the children, you can see children there. Can you say this is a demonstration? How much those children being paid? So when I say this is not demonstration, this is 3 incidents. I'm saying 3 incidents. I'm not saying there is nothing. There was 3 incidents. There's a difference between someone who said, I heard, and someone who said, I saw. I traveled up and down the country for 3 weeks for visiting people, for doing work, for interviews, for meetings, and I've seen nothing whatsoever in big towns and squares. They were not a peaceful country, nothing whatsoever.
Well,
then I heard in the same time about 3 little incidents that there were children and they were arrested and they were released because they are children.
Right. So much ado about nothing, says Mostafa Ragab, and clearly there's a huge discrepancy in the perception of what Hussein and Mostafa is saying here. Yes. Hussein, if we take your version that there are protests, as small and scattered as they may be, in rural and provincial parts of Egypt, what impact, if any, are they having?
Okay, so just one point, because I'm feeling that the guest is really saying that the public prosecutor is lying, which is a very serious claim. But what the public prosecutor specifically said is that they have released 68 children accused of participating in the recent quote-unquote riots, and that the public prosecution is continuing investigations with other suspects in the same case. And then I would refer him as well to the statement by the Ministry of Interior, where they have said that they have used tear gas to disperse some protests. So just to put that on the table very clearly. And then, I mean, in reference to your question, I think that from our point of view, from Amnesty's point of view, the main concern is how security forces responded to these protests, which is that through use of force, excessive use of force in some instances, but also through the arrest of hundreds of people, some of whom were detained for prolonged periods between 2 and 10 days in undisclosed locations where security is denied having them in custody. So from our concern is that the Egyptian authorities, they need to open an investigation into allegations of use of force immediately and to hold those accountable, but also make sure that anyone who's detained for peacefully protesting is released, and that for anyone else who's currently detained is to be promptly brought to trial or released.
Well, I think Hussein Baoumi and Mostafa Ragab, first of all, thank you for joining us. I think it's clear that there's no common ground, that we couldn't achieve any common ground, but thank you nonetheless for coming on the show, giving your sides of these protests that may or may not happen according to whom you believe. Thank you for joining us.